Hey, you are now listening to the Graceway Podcast. Let's talk. With special guest Todd Genteman.
All right, y'all. I'm here with Pastor Todd. Just preached a fantastic message in our Summer at Graceway series. Appreciate you doing that. Want to talk a little bit more through some of the concepts that you laid out for us. A lot to unpack, right? A lot that as people are trying to apply, trying to think. So just have a handful of things for you.
Yeah.
Just fire away.
Let's go.
We'll talk through it. You talked about punches come to prove your faith.
Right.
Which is a big concept, right?
Yes.
So I think probably the thing that I'd love for you to unpack is just the idea, you told that great story about God showing up, and we love as preachers, we love telling those, and they're inspiring, but sometimes people are in a season that they just feel like they just are getting punched over and over and again, or they have a story that they thought God was going to show up and he didn't, right? They passed, or they lost the house, or the relationship fell apart. So talk to me just about that idea, and then talk to me about how you would help somebody who's in the middle of a season that they feel like, I'm not getting closure, I'm not getting what I hope to get out of it.
Yeah, it's difficult because anytime you talk about a situation where God does come through, it leaves sometimes people think, well, why is he not coming through for me?
Right.
And there's no one answer for that.
Yeah.
There's no, well, if you just would do this, I think that's what we look for is, well, what can I do to make God do what he needs to do for me?
Yeah.
I think there's no clean cut answer. It really comes through the God's faithfulness for other situations is meant to encourage you even when your situation isn't going the way you want it to. Not just for the folks that can identify, but saying like, okay, if God can do that, then even though this seems to be delaying or it's not going how I want it to, and we had conversations after the sermon too of people that are just stuck in a situation and it seems to be the same thing every day. I think, keeping with like the letter of Peter, he would say endure.
Yeah.
And that's hard because suffering is not fun to endure in.
Right.
But I think that there are things that God gives his people to help them even in like longer seasons of suffering, like the church, his word, community through service, and serving others even despite your suffering. I think there's things that God gives us that can help us while we're waiting. I think there's kind of like a while you wait on God to bring about deliverance, there are things that we can do. And I think when we're not doing those things, it causes us to focus so much more on what God isn't doing than being a part of what God is doing. And it can lead us into despair.
Yeah, I think it's good. And you referenced it, what a gift the church is in that space, right? Because if I'm sitting there and I'm in a season and I hear your story, then I say, oh wait, God can do, or God has done. And maybe I'm reminded of my stories, or maybe I can just borrow your hopefulness, right?
Yeah.
But when we get in isolation, we don't have anybody with a different narrative or a different perspective. And it's really enduring in isolation is a killer.
Yeah, and I think suffering, when we suffer in silence or in solitude, it's like a cesspool.
Yeah.
Like there's no other voices or life to kind of clear out some of the junk that gets built up. That's real.
Yeah.
Like suffering is real. It's hard, and there are seasons that don't end quickly.
Yeah.
But I think when we allow our suffering to drive us to solitude, it's like we're just setting up for just breeding all different kinds of things, and being around people who are joyful, are hopeful. That's what you need in your suffering. As somebody who can pray for you, have a word for you, just invite you to a fun thing. To where you can just say like, oh, there's more to life than just what I'm going through.
And I also think, it's been interesting. I'm reading some of these theologians, and there's kind of this dismissiveness around that Romans 8:28 and 29, because it's such a coffee cup phrase, right? God works everything together for your good. But I think that sometimes in the middle of enduring, we forget God literally works everything together for our good.
Yep.
even this. And there will come a time, hopefully, where I'll be able to see it, hopefully on this side of eternity, maybe on that side of eternity, right? But I always need people around me to help in that regard. So you talked about rejoicing when struggles come up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So two pieces that I want you to unpack on that, because one is like,
fun.
yeah, Pastor, tell us to be happy when I'm struggling.
Right.
So help me with the perspective or the practices around that. And then I think the other thing is sometimes our struggles, like I did it, right? And maybe there's guilt connected. Maybe it's a consequence. Maybe it's I'm reaping what I've sown. So number one, just, okay, let's de-churchify this rejoice in struggling thing. Number two, when it's on me and I did it and I'm having to live in it, do I still rejoice then, or is there a different process around that? How would you help people unpack that?
Yeah. So really easy answer.
Yeah. That's right.
No, I think that, okay, so a few parts, like just rejoicing in hardship. I think a lot of what God's word would tell us is that, because our value or our future isn't dictated by our current circumstances, we can, by God's grace, rise above those things. Yeah. Now, in our flesh, we can get locked into it and get stuck. But by God's grace, he can help us rise above those circumstances, not negate them.
Yeah.
I think that's the hard thing is celebrating in your suffering doesn't negate the real feelings of sadness, of fear. Those are all real, and you should feel all of those. And you should cast your anxieties on the Lord because he cares for you. So feel all those things, give them to God, and realize that there's more than just what you're walking through. And that allows you to see, like, I have something to celebrate, even if I can't celebrate what I'm in. Yeah, I can celebrate what God is doing in me and what I know my eternity looks like. Because there's lifelong suffering that won't end this side of heaven. Yeah. So in that, there has to be something more than this life. Yeah. I think that's what the Christian hopes in. Yeah. So there's more than just this. With the circumstances or the consequences question, I think you can even rejoice when your mistake has brought about suffering. Yeah. Because you don't have to make that same mistake again. Yeah. So it's like my celebration can be like, God, thank you for exposing this. Yes. Yes. I think, being in ministry or, just being a person, you find a lot of people that their sin exposes them at some point. Yeah. Whether it's publicly, privately, in relationships, they get exposed somehow. I've always tried to help people understand that that's actually God's grace. Yes. Like that's being exposed before you absolutely destroy yourself is God's grace. So consequences being delivered to you is a method of God refining. Yeah. So you shouldn't have shame about consequences because there's no one on earth that hasn't done something terribly wrong. Right. That hasn't done what they knew better than doing. And so your consequences just are really, you couldn't celebrate them and say, God, thank you for not letting me destroy myself. Yes. Now, it's going to take you a minute to get there. Right, right. It's going to take you a minute to get there. But I think as you just, all the things we already talked about, as you're in community, as you're walking with people who don't care about your performance, but your personhood, those kind of things, you get there with the Lord over time. Yeah. But it'll take some time. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think on the consequences thing, you can celebrate the wisdom that I now have, the clarity that I now have. Sometimes wisdom is, I didn't touch the stove. Sometimes wisdom is, oh, now I know why to not touch the stove, right? And both have value. And I think on the rejoicing, I think the rejoicing thing we get thrown off because we think rejoicing is like celebratory, right? But it's not. It is to acknowledge that there's value and worth in this, right? Yeah. Seinfeld says, the great theologian Jerry Seinfeld, he says that pain is information rushing in to fill a gap. Yes, that's right. Every time when something painful happens to you, that's new information rushing in to fill the void that you had before. Yeah. And so it's like, now I know better.
Yeah.
I know different. I can do different.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And in Bible language, it's wisdom. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you're watching this, don't be happy in suffering. That's not what the Bible teaches. It's to acknowledge there's a worth and a value that God is both walking me through and giving to me.
Yep.
And has sovereignly chosen to use these circumstances to deliver that.
Yep.
Right. And so if you're not a Christian, suffering's a very difficult thing in the absence of a gracious God.
Yes.
Right. If I don't think God is good, I've got a good daddy who wants good things for me. So there's no kind of philosophic place for suffering. But our place is that our God chose to suffer and delivered all of these blessings to us through his suffering. Right.
Yeah.
That's the kind of penultimate theology for us as Christians. So yeah, that's good. Okay, so you mentioned following good leaders, which is so practical, but a little theoretical for some of us, right? Sure. So I'm sitting there and I'm saying, how do I find good leaders? What's a good leader look like? What would you describe? How would you describe a good leader? What is a good leader? What is a good leader not? All of those kind of things.
Sure.
I'm just throwing you all these softballs.
Yeah. I think, well, the exact answer. No, I think one, our culture has done a bad job of showing us who to follow.
Sure.
I think that oftentimes in culture, church culture too,
we
deify our leaders.
Yes.
Like we make them co-equal with God the Father.
Correct.
And therefore, when they do human things, we hate them.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's because like you're supposed to be God, though.
Yeah.
So I think that
why do you think we do that?
Because I think we love to worship things. I think God's made us to worship, and from the beginning of time, we've looked for things that we can handle or that we can touch to worship.
Sure.
God's like, worship me alone.
Yeah.
We're like, yeah, but this guy's a great talker.
Yeah. Right,
this person is really pretty, or they have a lot of money. And so we things that we can touch or that we can aspire to, we want to, I can be that. Yeah. So we want to be worshiped as well.
Sure.
So I think that we've done a bad job of identifying who to follow. And then we worship them instead of follow them.
Right.
So I think that the hard thing is we've made people that our leaders, we've made them distant from us. So I listen to this preacher.
Yeah.
I read this author, but you don't know any of them.
Right.
I think this is one of the reasons why the local church is so important.
Yeah.
Is to have leaders that you can see. Yeah. You can see their life. Yeah. You can see where they go wrong, and you can see how they correct those. You get to witness, because when, like in our text for today, Peter is laying out things that are observable.
Right.
Like he says, hey, look for leaders like this. Yeah. Everything he says is observable. So you got to don't look for leaders you can't observe. I think that we set ourselves up for failure when we do that. And then when those leaders fall, you're like, I never saw this coming. Well, you didn't see any of it. You just saw what they produce. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with listening and reading. Do those things, but don't do that in the absence of a local leader. I mean, the gift. The church is a gift from Jesus, and good pastors are a gift. And I think the scriptures are clear what makes good pastors: integrity, not leading under compulsion, but out of joy. So there's a few lists of what leaders should look like. Yeah. So I think those are a great place to start. Yeah. And I don't think that, we should make an absence of like being able to connect with somebody. Right. And there's a reality of like, and I just feel like I connect with this here. So that's great. I think you should follow that. I think that God has given the church amazing gifts. Yeah. And some churches are like amazing at this thing that you are in love with. So be there. That's right. Have joy. You shouldn't be somewhere out of obligation either. You should be somewhere out of joy. That's right. That's right. Yeah. 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 No, we could go on and on. I think, and
I think that we're trying to do this at Graceway, but I think sometimes it's just important for the leader to say out loud, I'm trying to get you to someone else.
Yes.
I think if there's the sense in church setting, and we could go crazy and talk about leadership, maybe we'll do that another time, but I think it's important for pastors to say, I'm trying to get you to Jesus, and that you hear that and that you feel that, and that the rhythm in the church is a regular, not me, him kind of thing. I think that is the biblical obligation of a pastor. I think that sometimes in the celebrity of it, sometimes we get a little like, no, me. But I think that you want your pastor, wherever you are, this church or someplace else, to regularly be saying, I'm trying to get you to someone else.
Yeah.
That's a trustworthy.
Yes. And in doing that, that's protection for the leader and the congregation.
That's right.
It protects everybody.
That's right.
Because when things go sour, because we're people, they always do.
That's right.
You're like, okay, well, I'm not the model.
Yeah. I tried to tell y'all.
You're focusing on Jesus. Yeah. Now, I think, another part of the conversation is having standards for your leaders. I
Absolutely.
think there's biblical standards of and when leaders fall short of that, we shouldn't destroy them.
Correct.
I think that's another thing, is because they're not God.
Yeah.
When they prove themselves human, we treat them like humans.
Yeah.
And we restore and we love. Now, their future may look different than it did in the past.
Sure.
But if there's grace for the hearer, there should be grace for the leader as well.
That's right. Okay, last one. You talked about resist handling it yourself, which, man, a huge concept, especially here in the West, where there is so much that we can handle. So talk to me about what it looks like to regularly balance. Maybe balance is the right word. Where would you say my stewardship ends and God's responsibility picks up? How do you think about that? Resist handling it yourself, but obviously there are things that we would say, no, you need to do this, right?
Right.
So what's help me think through my side of the equation, and then what does it look like to be a good steward and fully rely on God's faithfulness? How do you think Peter's, what's he trying to get at there?
Yeah, I think that I don't know that it's even really like an ending and a beginning of stewardship.
Yeah.
I really think there's a partnership with God.
Okay.
Where, in whatever you're doing, whether eating or drinking, do all for the glory of God. So I think that there are some things you can't do. There are some rooms you can't get into. Yeah. There are some places you don't have a presence in that God has to move and do things. And there's a certain point where your strategy is exhausted. Yeah. And God's supernatural power has to take place in that space. But I think that we, either we have this faith, just give it all to God and we just forget about it. Yeah. Or I'll tell God when I'm done with this.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
I'll show him what I've done. Yeah. And then maybe if he can embellish every once in a while. Yeah. So I really think it's a partnership with God. God, I feel like every step of Scripture, God's calling us into relationship. It's come and see. Yeah. Remember what I've done. Come and see, and walk with me in the future. So I feel like it's, hey, God, I want to give this to you as I walk with you and see you not just accomplish the end, but accomplish all the steps with me as I'm just trying to be obedient. Yeah. And even in your trying to be obedient, you're gonna try to pick the thing back up and try to claim ownership of it again. Yeah. And God will have to slap your hand and remind you to hand it over. Yeah. But that's part of the relationship with your dad. So then with my kids, I'm like, hey, let me do this and that for you. And they look over, I see them trying to tie their shoes, and it's in a bird's nest on their foot, or and it's no, I want to help you with that. And they have to be reminded that I love them. Yeah. Not only can I do what they can't do, but I actually enjoy doing it for them. Yeah. And then as you grow in that understanding, I think that knowing when to, okay, I'm going to work on this. Now it's never yours. Yeah. I'm taking part in this. It always belongs to God. I'm going to use the gifts he's given me to do what I can do, knowing the whole time it doesn't really belong to me. And at any moment, I'll just hand it off again. So I really think I don't know that it's clear cut. So I think that as you walk in a relationship with God, as you make the mistake of handing it off and stepping away too much,
Sure.
then you learn like, okay, well, I still need to have some responsibility here. And as you claim ownership too much and realize like I'm messing this up, like I give it back, you begin to learn relationally how to engage with the Lord.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, I know one thing, especially like on the worship side, Pastor Brandon and I will say, and on the preaching side, right? Mm-hmm. I want to study. I want to be prepared. I want him to do the same. I want to do everything that I can, like it's up to me. Like,
right.
But I also acknowledge that even if I do everything that I can, that's not enough.
Mm-hmm.
Right? No matter what, my 100% is still not enough if God doesn't bless, doesn't anoint, doesn't bring favor, all of those kind of things. Yeah. So I'm always dependent, but that doesn't mean that I'm not to steward the things that God has put in front of me. But I like how you said it, the relational element of just kind of learning how God's leading me.
Yep.
Makes it sort of feels like that's not as clear as I would like it to be.
Right.
But maybe that's the point, right? Because relationships
take time. And that's what I think I did like the Ian Bounds. I just read Ian Bounds this past week where it says like men are looking for better methods, God's looking for better men.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Like, but right, it guts you.
Yeah.
And it's because we're always looking for. Well, tell me how. Yeah. Tell me how. Tell me how. And God's like, you don't really get to know how. You get to know me.
It's good.
As I work out the how.
It's good.
And so if we can see it less of like, God is not a means to an end.
Yeah.
Like my relationship with God is not just to get me where I need to go.
Yeah.
Like God's like, no. Like I'm the end.
Yeah.
And I'm the means.
Yeah.
And he's like, just be with me.
It's good.
So
that's good. All right, man. We could go on. That's good.
Part 2.
Love you, man.
Thanks for tuning into the Graceway Experience. Hope we can talk again sometime.